Hi, everybody, and welcome to Exegetically Speaking, a podcast of the friends and faculty of Wheaton College, Wheaton, Illinois, and the Lanier Theological Library in Houston, Texas. My name is David Capes, and I am the Senior Research Fellow at the Lanier Theological Library and a former dean up there in Wheaton at the School of Biblical and Theological Studies. Our purpose in these podcasts is really very simple. We want to promote the study of biblical languages, Greek, Hebrew, Aramaic, so we can read the Bible more faithfully, study it more fully, and not just read it, but to live it. Hey, joining me today on Exegetically Speaking is Amy Allan. She's an adjunct professor of theology at Trinity Christian College here in Chicagoland. She's also taught at Northern Seminary and here at Wheaton College. She's an alum of Wheaton because she's working on her PhD here. So, Amy, great to see you.
Great to see you as well, David.
Now, how did you learn to read Hebrew?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, I learned Hebrew and also Greek when I was doing MDiv studies at Covenant Theological Seminary in St. Louis, Missouri.
Now, did they put you through a lot of hard work there?
It was rigorous. I studied under some exceptional professors and so grateful for the basis of that education that then I was able to build on when I came here to Wheaton to begin my PhD studies.
And you've used Hebrew in particular through these studies, right?
I have. And also here at Wheaton, I've learned Akkadian and German and French, which assist me in my research.
So now, Akkadian is an ancient language, but German and French are fairly modern, I think, right?
That's true.
Yeah, but it's helpful to know these other modern languages when you're doing research, because certain articles and maybe even books have not been translated into English, so you've got to know those modern languages.
That's true.
Yeah. Today we're going to talk about Job, chapter 42, which is a climactic chapter in the whole story of Job. Set it up for us. What's going on here that we need to know in order to interpret well this text?
Sure. I think you're spot on by calling it a climactic moment in the book of Job. So what we've had is the book of Job is interesting in that the prologue and the epilogue are written in prose, and the whole body of the book of Job, chapters 3 through 41, are written in poetic form. So we're in the poetry section of Job, and chapters 38 through 41, God has shown up and responded. We heard a lot of dialogue between Job and his friends in the earlier chapters.
Friends and square.
Friends and air quotes,
Yeah.
since we're not on TV.
Right.
And so here we hear God responding to what has been happening. And Job 42, 1 through 6 is a very brief reply of Job responding to how God has spoken to him in chapters 38 through 41.
And how would you characterize the overall response? I mean, once God has spoken, you sort of said, okay, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much. But how would you characterize his statement here? And we're going to focus specifically on verse 6, chapter 42, verse 6.
Yes, I think 42:6 helps us see what his posture is to God's speech that he has delivered in chapters 38 through 41. It's kind of a, oh, my bad moment. It's a moment of reflection of what's gone before. And so let's look at a few of the English translations. Chapter 42, verse 6. So commonly it's brought over into English, therefore I despise myself and repent in dust and ashes. Or we could go old school, wherefore I abhor myself and repent in dust and ashes. So it had me curious, what's going on with that first verb, I despise or I abhor? What's going on with that? So if we look at the Hebrew, the verb here is ma'as. And it's here in a call imperfect form. And the interesting thing is there's no direct object. So in the translations we heard, I despise myself. The myself is being supplied.
By the translators.
By the translator, which is, a common thing to have take place in a translation. However, this verb ma'as in this context does not actually have a reflexive type syntactical meaning. So the myself could be an option, but there might be some other things that might be available to supply for the direct object. So I took a look at, where ma'as is used elsewhere in Job. If we look at chapter 7, verse 16, it's talking about, in verse 15, it says, I choose death rather than my bones. This is, again, Job speaking, but much earlier in the book. He's choosing death. And then in verse 16, it says, I loathe my life. That loathe there is arma'as.
So typically this word has a direct object.
It typically does.
Okay.
Not always, but again, in poetry, sometimes we use words in a little bit different format than we would otherwise. So here, the my life is supplied by the translators as the direct object. And it looks like they looked up above into the contextual clues. And my bones is actually metatomically representative of someone's life, not just your actual bones, but the totality of who you are, your life.
Right.
And so
where would you be without your bones?
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
For sure. So we see that the direct object in 7:16, they looked for textual clues above to fill in that, just like we might.
Okay. I see what you're saying.
With like a pronoun, say we have it in a sentence, you might go back to say, okay, what is the it referring to?
Yeah.
What is the antecedent? So if we apply that same type of posture to our text in 42:6, if we look at 42:6, what is happening contextually in verses 1 through 6? Well, Job is saying, I know that you can do everything and that no thought is withheld from you. So he's doing some acknowledgement of who God is, which is significant after Yahweh has shown up and spoken to him. And then he says, I've heard you with my ears, and now I see you with my eyes. He's saying, I spoke out of turn. In verse 13, I've uttered things that I don't understand. So it seems like there may be some contextual clues that would offer that instead of despising his life in a self-loathing type of a way, he may be recanting or relenting or rethinking, trying to pull off the table words that he said about God previously.
Okay, so I'll take that back.
Yeah,
Now,
my
God,
bad.
I want to take that back.
I
right?
take back what I said about you. Yeah, so instead of self-loathing, maybe he's recanting.
Interesting. Okay.
Looking at, I take back the things that I ascribed to God. Throughout the book, he's been calling for an audience with God. If God would just show up and tell me what's going on, I could understand. So he had this posture of, I have the ability and capacity to understand if God would just tell me. And here he's saying, that might not be true, actually. And I repent of saying that. I repent of my posture of thinking I could know all that God might know if he would just show up and tell me.
It's a little interesting, different twist on it, isn't it?
It does give us a little, the possibility of the other translation of, self-loathing is on the table as well. But looking at the Hebrew and looking at how to bring a direct object into the sentence, it does give us a little bit of a different feeling. And then the dust and ashes at the latter part of the verse just shows how remorseful he is. He's sincerely
deeply remorseful for the things that he has said.
For
I
sure.
like that reading of it. I think that you're on to something here. Is this something you're going to write about, publish somewhere, or?
I don't know. Who knows? I just
knows?
taught on this week, so it's
Okay.
been fresh in my mind, and just wanting to understand Job well. And since it's a response, it's a book that helps us understand how do we interact with God in moments when we don't understand the calamity that surrounds us.
Yeah.
And so knowing his posture is a bit helpful.
And being able, in a way, to even imitate that. God, I know I've said things. I'm sorry. I want to take those things back. Have these thoughts about you. Take those back. And I'm so sorry that I'll repent in dust and ashes, which is that's terrific reading. Thank you.
Oh, thank
Amy,
you so
for being
much.
a part of our podcast today.
My pleasure.
Thanks to Ian Rosine, Rebecca Larson, and Silvio Vasquez, who help us produce this podcast. Thanks as well to John Lansma, our Wheaton-based director, who makes this podcast possible. We're grateful to Phil Keggy for our music. If you want to study biblical languages, then you need to consider Wheaton College. Whether you're an undergraduate or a graduate student, we have amazing programs, our first-rate faculty, and some of the best students in the world. So go to the website, www.wheaton.edu, and look for modern and classical languages. Get started today. If you have questions about this or any of our podcasts, we'd love to hear from you. If you have suggestions or questions about any passage in the Hebrew Bible or Greek New Testament, send us an email and we'll see if we can get one of our experts to weigh in on that for you. Our email is exegetically.speaking@wheaton.edu. That's exegetically.speaking@wheaton.edu. Thanks for listening.